Good morning, everyone. Today I have fixed my audio issues and we are going to go into Doomed Encampment. This build is one of the builds of all time. It is what you might call gun shaman. It involves using a gun. Although I might more accurately call it rocket launcher shaman, because whenever you land a hit, there's also a massive area of effect. Unfortunately, this rocket launcher also falls off a cliff after you get more than 3 blocks away from an enemy, which makes it a little bit unfriendly to use, but beggars can't be choosers, and shamans are definitely beggars. Alright. So, how does this build work? Well, Desecrating Shot is, so far as I know, the one remaining ability with split scaling. That is, it scales multiplicatively off both both kinds of damage that it receives. Divine Justice used to do this, and they shot it. They haven't shot Desecrating Shot yet, but I'm sure it's only a matter of time. Watch that. The reason now, this isn't particularly powerful unless you go into the niche that it in fact that's kind of built for it, like items like Matted Golfer, right, which had both melee and projectile, or items like Crown. No, I'm thinking of Primordial Skin or Muranic Urn, which scale off which give you both projectile and magic damage. Those are the kind of items that you might use to scale your damage in 2 ways. However, those hybrid pieces have kind of fallen off a cliff because there's no real reason to use them, right? Unless you're like an Isles Paladin or an Isles melee warlock, because they no longer like multiply off of each other, so you're straight up better getting your damage either from pure melee or from pure magic, right, in the case of Divine Justice. And there is, however, one thing that still scales off both of these, and that's Desecrating Shot, because the resulting shot AoE is a separate instance of damage from the projectile, and instead of reading off the base damage of the projectile that shot it, it reads off the actual damage that it dealt. Well, apart from the small asterisk where it doesn't really consider weaken or mobs or effects that were on the mob, but it does consider. What it does consider is technique. It considers technique once for the projectile attack, and it considers technique once for the magic attack. So in total, you actually get that it considers technique twice. This build has technique 10, which means that you get a very respectable plus 75% projectile and plus 100% magic damage when within 3 blocks. That within 3 blocks is a pretty harsh requirement, but if you can pull it off, for example, because anything that you shoot also dies, you can do very well. Unfortunately, it is very easy to get swarmed because you have to load your crossbow. As you can see, I'm also carrying a silver scale laser in my first slot. It's because you can also use silver scale laser for this build. The damage will be much lower, but it's something you can do. And you can abuse the point blank because you need to be within 3 blocks to get the technique buff anyways. So you might as well, so why bother with a bow that can do all ranges? You're already going to be within 3 blocks. Sadly, there aren't exactly any technique bows yet, but maybe we'll get there. I've also elected to use like a crossbow and not a bow, because I find it much easier to go up to an enemy and shoot them than to go up to an enemy and load. Because this is a build which really requires you to play very accurately, in the sense that you have to, whatever you're shooting at, you have to be able to flick your head and land the shot. It benefits a lot from FPS, which I don't have because I'm recording. If you take a peek in the top left hand corner, I am averaging about 30. 30 is not actually enough to play this build well. So if you are watching, I recommend you go and give it a whirl. It does involve Stargazer's Shadow. That is the downside, because Stargazer's Shadow has technique, and unfortunately that means that because it's hex formatter, it's super expensive. But good pieces are good. What can I say? The other part of this build is Totemic Projection U. Okay, we're gonna recover and heal for a little bit, get the tempo back up, and still die because I missed the shot, the lag. At least you can just burrow through encampment and end up wherever you want. But if you do manage to get your hands on a Stargazer's Shadow, the other pieces are pretty cheap. So I recommend you give the build a shot on your own, because this video is not going to do it justice. I would consider myself decent at the build, but that's when I have 70 frames and not 30. There are other considerations for the bow or crossbow that you can use. Of course, you will know that most normal desecrating shot users use a trident. I'm not too big of a fan of tridents because or not too big of a fan of tridents in this context, because I missed. I am gonna die. Unless my healing totem can save me, and my healing totem did not save me. I'm not a fan of tridents or bows in this situation. And also, Serif gives a lot more damage, just raw damage, than any trident or crossbow or bow could give me. Silver Scale and Portal Core are options. Portal Core not so much, because the cooldown on Portal Core is actually longer than the cooldown on dshot. So you're gonna be missing a lot of opportunities to deal damage. And besides, you're gonna be in point blank range, so Silver Scale has nearly the same damage anyways. If your enemy is particularly difficult to hit, there is no shame in just setting up your totems and then ignoring the main point of the build. You are still a shaman, you can still use your totems. They are not just fuel for that like 72% damage that you get when you cast Totemic Projection. However, if you do choose to use them as fuel, you do this. And I think that's pretty neat. There are benefits, of course, to offhanding a snowball. One of which is that you can just shoot it, even if your crossbow isn't loaded because you have to like run away. You can still shoot mobs. The shield being in the slot is very, very strange. Unfortunately, it is also the only pick, because this is the only offhand technique agility slot. Yes, there's Wolf Sorcery, but that's A, armor, and B, technique 1, which is pitiful. Hexcrafted Barrier makes for very interesting interaction, where you can shield and also attack. Frees up one hotbar slot. The choice to be casting with Courage of the Rampart is partially an optimization, because it represents like a 5% cooldown reduction on totems. So more totem uptime equals more totemic projection U uptime equals more damage. But it's also a matter of I bound my totems to left and to right click, and I don't want to go and change them to be bow compatible. If you chose to have something to cast with, you probably would use Withering Hydrangea if you happen to have that infused. Okay, I have too many potions. Yeesh. There is also the possibility of using Shadowstone Ballista. Even though the damage is a bit lower, you get the multi-shot, which means that sometimes you hit a mob that you have missed otherwise, because it like juked to the left. I did see there was a very interesting thought that maybe the multi-shot would proc Desecrating Shot several times, because they would all hit on the same tick, but that turned out to be false. So sadly, you cannot have multiple overlapping AoE attacks. I believe the same has happened to piercing, but if you are going to hit a mob on this build, it usually dies mobs not being dead after taking a direct hit are usually a product of unyielding or similar Totem of Undying mechanics. It really is a shame that Stargazers has the cloaked situational, because there's no good way to be using cloaked on a build like this, on a build with technique, because you need to be in the mob's face in order to get damage. There is an argument which says it's beneficial if you choose to stand away from the mob, take less damage during the run-up, and then run in and land your killing blow. But I think the synergy doesn't really exist as much. Then again, at least it probably eats up less budget because of the anti-synergy. But I think I'd rather have more raw agility on the item. In general, I don't like cloaked. It doesn't feel powerful enough, or rather, it feels far too situational. Which, wow, it's a situational shocker, but unlike, say, reflexes, where you can say, oh, this is useful because having mobs swarming me is something that happens a lot, and that okay, don't do that, please. I can't really leave this area. That might have been the wrong potion to drink. I wanted the instant health. There we go. When you're faced with a mob that you can't one-shot, like this Twisted Champion, sometimes your best bet is just to let the totems do their thing. I managed to make it out alive from that one. Very surprising. Overall, I would class this as a gimmick build for anyone without a good computer, and then I would still class it as a gimmick build for someone with a good computer, but at least it would be playable. This is playable, but only if I'm not actually recording. But I did want to showcase the build because it's so funny. And because it lets you just stand here and shoot the mob dead. Hope this auditory experience was much better than every single previous video.